Hey there, CS125 designer students. This is Jeremy here, going to give you guys a quick rundown, quick tutorial on lesson 4, introducing cascading style sheets. And I figured I'd do it this way to help you guys with your first cascading coding assignment. Okay, so I'm in the Blackboard shell, and I'm going to click over to lessons here. I'm going to scroll down to lesson 4, cascading style sheets. And I'm going to scroll down again to where the assignment is, so I can download the folder and the asset files and then begin the tutorial. So I'm going to be toggling back and forth here because here are the instructions. Here's the page that we're going to create using HTML and CSS. So I need to download the assignment file by clicking on this link. And I'm going to go ahead and save the file so it comes into my downloads down here. And I'm going to go ahead and just minimize all my windows here, and you're going to notice my desktop is very messy. Just ignore that. And I'm going to drag that student file right onto my desktop and then double click that and open that so I have just the student file folder there. And I'm going to go ahead and trash that zipped file because I don't need it anymore. I'm going to open up this file, and then inside I should see an images folder and then an untitled HTML folder. So what I want to do is I want to rename this file real quick. So I'm going to call this intro CSS. Do it that way, and then lesson 4. Okay. Now this would normally be like www.somewebsite.com, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it as intro CSS lesson 4. Next, I'm going to go ahead and open up Dreamweaver, and I'm going to define the site for this. You'll notice that last couple weeks ago we talked about using Dreamweaver to define a site and the benefits of doing so, allowing you to switch between sites and seeing all of your asset files. This is one of the sites that I manage, and you can tell that there's a lot of files in here, so it's super critical and beneficial to do this procedure in Dreamweaver. So I'm going to come up to here and just show you by clicking down on this. You'll see all the different sites here that I've created or managed at some point. And you'll even see this one, which is a tutorial that I've put together or done for a future lesson in our class. So I'm going to go up to Site, New Site, excuse me. I'm going to title this Lesson 4, Intro to CSS. Oops, can't type. And remember, in this site name part, we can have different characters. This name is what appears up in this drop-down menu. Where the local site folder is, I'm going to hit the Browse for File button, and it didn't let me do that. It said it didn't like something, probably because I have a colon in there. So let's go back to Desktop here, and I am looking for Intro CSS Lesson 4, that file I created, and I'm going to hit Choose, and I'm going to back that off and see why does it not like this. It says incorrect. Let's see if I can save this real quick. There we go. I think it didn't like the colon in there. Okay, excuse me. So I have my images folder in here. I have 2 images, HTML and then layout, and then I also have an untitled HTML file. I want to go ahead and rename this, so I'm going to just slow click inside of this where it says untitled and change that to index.html. I could also right click on that and select edit and then rename. Okay, so I'm going to double click this file so I can open it, and you'll notice that it opens up in code. Let's pop back over to design view real quick, and what you're going to see is it's just basically all text, super plain, no styling to it at this point. I'm going to drop back into code. Okay, you'll also notice that there is one section of CSS already in here. There is a div with a border radius of 15 pixels, and you'll notice that there are 2 different lines here that say border radius, and one says dash Mozilla or MOZ, and that is specifically for the Firefox browser, and then all other browsers like Safari and Internet Explorer get the border radius, just plain border radius. Okay. So this is good. This is going to help us. We've already got our embedded style sheet started for us, our embedded styles started for us. So I don't actually have to type that in, and there's already a style here, which is going to come in handy. This particular tag is just the div tag. It's not a name or it's not an ID. So we'll be applying that in a couple of different places later on in our tutorial. I'm going to toggle back over to, oops, not toggle because it's not open, toggle over to Blackboard again, and then go back to lesson 4 and wait for that to open and scroll down, and I just want to see what my first steps are. So I've done the downloading the assignment file, I've set up a local root folder just like that, and then it says open untitled and rename it, and then using a single external CSS file only, recreate the following web page. Specifics on formatting follow the image. So it wants me to create an external style sheet for this assignment, which I think is a good idea. So let me scroll down here and make sure that this is exactly what I want to do. Yep, okay. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to come back here and look at the other things that I need to do. Create a container div for the page, apply a heading. Okay, so I'm going to toggle back over to my assignment, to my page, and I'm going to create an external style sheet for this assignment. And using an external style sheet just for about anything is just a standard practice, and basically it's a separate file that I'm going to link with this HTML file. Okay. So before I do that though, I want to make sure that I'm organized. So I'm going to go back to my Finder and go back to my desktop where I have that assignment file, Intro to CSS Lesson 4, and I'm going to open that file and I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to title it _CSS. This is where I'm going to put my CSS file. Okay. Sometimes in some websites you might have multiple CSS files associated with one site. Okay, that's why the folder. So I'm going to exit out of that, and over here in my files panel I'm just going to hit the refresh button. Oh, there it went, popped in, so my CSS folder shows up. Then I'm going to go up to File, New, and I'm going to select from New Document, I'm going to select CSS. Okay, so New Document, CSS, and then Create. And then before I do anything, I need to save this. So I'm going to go File, Save As, and I want to put it in that CSS folder. Since I've defined the root, comes right up for me. And for the name, I'm just going to call this Intro CSS Main. A lot of times CSS files have the word main in them as meaning main styles for that website or that page. So I'm just going to go ahead and click Save there. And then I actually don't need this open right now because I'm going to link this into my HTML file. So I'm going to exit that out, and then I'm going to type in the code to link that file into my HTML file. So I need to put that in a very specific place. It needs to be inside the head tag. So there's the start of the head tag right there, and here is the end of the head tag. Now right now we have a little bit of an error. This CSS styling right here falls outside of the head tag, so I need to move that inside of there. So I'm going to place my cursor on line 6 right before the head there, and then I'm going to hit enter return about 3 times, and then from there I'm just going to highlight where it says, oops, forgot to grab the closing style tag. I'm going to highlight from the closing style tag to the opening style tag, and I'm going to just click and move that up to line 6. Okay. Next, I'm going to place my cursor on line 15, and this is where I'm going to link my style sheet into this page. So I'm going to start by typing the left caret and typing in link space href, so just like a regular file path for an image or a file in HTML. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit the enter return key so my code hint completes that out. And then I'm going to hit enter return one more time so that way I can browse for that file. And notice that it came right up for me. You might have to navigate to your CSS file there to select it. So I'm just going to go ahead and click open. Not quite done yet. I need to type in a couple more lines here. I need to type in REL for, I believe it stands for relationships or relative or something like that. And then hit enter return key. And then what we're doing is we're typing in style sheet. Okay? And enter return. And then hit the space bar one more time. And we're going to type in type. And this is a text CSS type style sheet. And then we need to close that out or end that statement with a right caret, and you should get the / there ending that statement. And that should be about it for what we need to do on that. And what it's going to do when I hit save, and then let's hit refresh. Didn't pop up. Oh, refresh down here on the very bottom with my properties inspector. If you don't see your properties inspector open, just select Windows, Property. And now when I hit refresh at the top, I should see two bubbles. One is source code and one is my CSS file. I can switch back and forth between these two in my same file because now I've linked this style sheet up into this page. So the majority of my styling is going to happen in this section. And I'm going to switch back over to source code, and you'll notice that I have, again, this little div style here that's within what's called the embedded styles. And the reason why it's embedded is it's because it's embedded in the HTML head tag. Okay, the difference between embedded and external is that this is an external or separate file that is linked or brought into my HTML page. So what I want to do is I actually want to take this style that already exists. I don't need this part, okay? I can leave that. I just want the curly brace to the div tag there. I want to take that and move it into my style sheet. So I'm going to Command X or Control X to cut that out, and then switch over to my intro CSS style sheet, and on about line 4 I'm just going to hit Command V or Control V for paste. Okay? So that way it's still part of my style sheet, but then all my styles will end up in the same place. Now you'll notice a couple things. Right now you'll see that I have an asterisk next to intro CSS main up here in the bubble. That means I've made changes to it and it hasn't been saved. You'll also notice that under next to index.html on this tab there's also another asterisk, and that's because that's the source code and that also has had some changes and needs to be saved. So case in point, and the reason why I bring this up is because you have to save both of these files in order for your site to display properly when you test it, or at the end when you're ready to submit your assignment. If you don't save both, then you're gonna only have one. One of those files gets saved, and so you're going to be missing essentially half of your website. So the way to get around that is to go up to File, Save All, and that will save both of your source code, your index file, and your CSS file as well, and those asterisks go away. Okay, so I'm going to toggle back over to Blackboard and start designing this page. So I'm going to scroll down here, and it says create a container div for the web page. The width is 80%, background color is white, change background of the body to a light gray, font family is Lucida Sans, and add 10 pixel padding, 10 pixels padding on all sides. Okay, so I need to change, first off, this is kind of confusing right here. So the background color of the div should be white, the background color of the body should be a light gray. Those are two separate things. So I'm going to Control tab back over to Dreamweaver, and then I'm going to first go into my style sheet here. So above where it says div, this is where I want to change my change the background color of the body So I'm going to click my cursor right around line 4 and place it above the div, and I'm going to hit the enter return key 2 times. And that way I have space to start the body. So I'm going to move my cursor up to line 4. And the reason why I want to put body first is because body is everything inside your web page. So as you start styling and putting styles in, you almost have to think in a linear fashion about how your page is organized. And as you write your styles should also be organized in the same way. It just makes it easier to find stuff later on. So I'm going to type in body, and then I'm going to open up a curly brace, and then hit enter return. So I drop down a line, and then I'm going to type in background. And then I'm going to hit enter return when my code hint comes up. And then I'm going to select color from my code hint by either typing in the pound symbol or selecting it from the list here and hitting the enter return key. And it says a light gray. So I'm going to click on my hex button here and scroll up. I'm going to look for something that's close to like CCC, and then oops, I got off there. So I'm going to delete that off. CCC is a pretty light gray, and I just know that from experience. Next, I'm going to hit the enter return key and then close that out with a curly brace so that it ends that statement. I'm going to go ahead and save as I go, so I'm going to hit Command S real quick, and I'm going to tab over to our directions, because it says font family here is Lucida Sans, and there's two places that I can put this in. I can put this in this div, which we already have created for us, or I can put it with the body. The question is are we changing fonts anywhere else within our text? And as I'm scrolling through the directions here, I don't see a place where we change text within that div. So it's actually probably a good idea to go ahead and place that Lucida Sans font family within the body tag. It's always a good idea to set your default font in the body tag rather than in just like a div tag of some sort. So I'm going to tab back over to Dreamweaver, and I like to keep my background color properties on the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place my cursor after that curly brace of body and hit the enter return key, so that way when I start typing in font family, it goes above the background color. So I'm going to select font family from the list, and then I'm going to select Lucida Sans from the drop down list there, and don't forget that I'm going to don't forget to type in at the very end a semicolon. Sorry guys about the phone thing. I think this is an RCC drill that's happening right during our tutorial. So I'm going to put that, make sure you get that semicolon there at the end, and that'll set up our default font family. Okay, next it says to make our div width 80%. Come back here and it says create a container div for the page. Width is 80%. Background color is white. Change background of the body to a light gray. Add 10 pixels padding on all sides. So I already have a div tag targeted, but what it says is to create a container div. Now if I apply the properties that it's asking me to, like width 80% and all that kind of stuff, anytime I use a div tag in the rest of my page here, it's going to get the same properties. So no matter what, 80% I would get, or 80% or background color or anything, if I put those underneath this generic div tag, anytime I use a div tag, it's going to get those properties. So what I need to do is create an ID and apply that ID to my div tag. Now here's a general rule of thumb, and more like guidelines. It's like, Captain Jack Sparrow and Pirates of the Caribbean. These more like guidelines, not necessarily rules. The general rule of thumb is you use IDs on things that you only use once in your page, and you use classes when you use them multiple times. So in this case, I'm going to use an ID for my container div. So I'm going to type in the pound symbol to indicate that it's an ID, and I'm going to type in, usually I call it like page wrapper or something like that, or something very descriptive. So I'm just going to call this we'll just call this page container. Notice that I have no spaces, and because it's two words, I capitalize C there. Okay, so I'm giving it its own specific name, which is an ID, right? IDs you make the names for the IDs. And then I'm going to open up a curly brace and then hit the enter return key. The width of this is 80%, so I'm going to type in width. Be careful when you do width, because it's real easy when you start to type in WID, you can accidentally select widows. Okay, so don't want to do that. Make sure you've selected width, and when you hit the enter return key, it'll complete that for you with the colon, and this is going to be 80%. And then make sure you end that line with a semicolon. Next is padding. I always try to do in terms of my properties and values, I always try to do them in a certain order. And so when it comes to dimensions, I always try to do the dimensions first. And padding is part of that dimension. So I'm going to type in padding, and I believe, toggle back over real quick, padding, it says 10 pixels on all sides. So type in 10 pixels there. After the padding, make sure I end that statement with a semicolon. And then last but not least, the background color is white. So I'm going to type in background, and background color white is always just FFF. Just 3 F's. That's the short version of the 6 hexadecimal number. So and then I'm going to hit the enter return key and close that out with a curly brace. So a couple things to remember here, right? This is an ID. This ID, I am planning on applying this ID to a div tag. So here's the thing. Remember up here I have a div. I'm targeting this tag, the div, and it's going to get 15 pixels radius. So when I create my div tag, it's going to get this property, and when I apply the ID page container, it's going to get these properties as well. Okay? So I'm going to click back over to my source code. And what I want to do is all of my content that's inside the body, so everything from introducing cascading style sheets here to the bottom of the copyright is going to go inside of that div tag. Okay, so I'm going to place my cursor right inside the P there, the P tag of introducing cascading style sheets, and hit the enter return key. Then I'm going to move my cursor up to the bottom, up to the top, and then I'm going to type in left caret and div space ID, and once I get the ID in my code hint, hit the enter return key, and you'll notice that in my code hinting, my ID that I've created already, it shows up. So then I don't have to type it. The thing about IDs and classes, when you type them, if you don't type them exactly how you type them in the style style sheet, then it won't work. They have to be exactly spelled the same capitalization, everything. So don't forget that right caret at the end there. Okay, and then down here at the bottom, at the very end where it says copyright 2013 your name, put your cursor at the end there, hit the enter return key, left caret /. So that closes that statement out. Now I like to, whenever I use div tags that are containers, so if you remember right, this page container, everything within this section here goes inside of page container. And in my code, I want it to look that way as well, so I don't forget that that's what I'm doing. So over here on the left hand side, you're going to see this little button called indent code. Highlight that whole section from introducing cascading and copyright, and then click indent. So now that your code, and you can do it a couple times if you'd like, now my code is inside, and it looks like it's inside because it's indented inside my container there. Okay, so I'm going to go up and hit save all real quick, and then tab over to design and see what I've got so far. Now what you're going to notice is my corners aren't rounded, and that's because I'm still in my design view. As soon as I preview this in a browser, or if I go to live view, I should see those corners round out for me. Okay, so far so good. Okay, so next I want to tab back over. Oops, I want to tab back over to Firefox. I'm going to go ahead and close that one out so I can get back onto my window. And it says apply heading 1 and heading 2 to the text at the top of the document. The heading 1 text uses font color number for cascading style sheets. Okay, so let's see here. Introducing, oh, I see. So that we have the heading 1, and then we have this color here, cascading style sheets, and then we have a heading 2 right below that. So I'm going to just need that color there, so I'm going to preemptively highlight that color number and hit Command C or Control C so that I can have that here in just a minute. I didn't grab all of it. Make sure I do. There we go. And then I'm going to tab over to Dreamweaver here and click on Code, and you're going to notice that those first two top lines are in paragraph tags. So I want to change those to heading 1 tags. Now I can just simply retype those, or I can highlight that line, and down in my properties inspector I can change that to just a heading 1 and it'll automatically do it for me. I'm going to highlight line 2, and where it says format, change that to a heading 2. Okay, now here's the problem. When I switch over to design here, okay, this first part is black. This second part is a different color. It's blue. Now, when I want to, if I want to change this second part to blue, I can't just do that in targeting an H1 tag, unfortunately. I can try, but what it's going to do is it's going to turn this whole line blue because it falls inside that H1 tag, right? So I want to go ahead and keep the whole thing black except for this section. So in order to do that, I need to apply what's called a span tag to this section. And a span tag, or I could apply, say, like a bold tag or a strong tag. I could do it the same way, but those come with default properties of their own. What a span tag allows me to do is basically a span tag holds nothing. It's basically an empty tag, but it allows you to change the properties of what's inside of that span tag. So if I want to change the color of this text, I just have to create a class to apply to that span tag. So I'm going to type in the left caret here and type in span, and then right caret end it, and then at the end of where it says sheets, type in the left caret /. Now right now this isn't going to do anything. It's still going to be black, and that's because I haven't done anything to this span tag. Now I don't want to just apply the styling to just span itself, because then every time I use span it will give it that same blue text. So I'm going to click over to my style sheet here, and on line 18, sorry for the bell, on line 18 I'm place my cursor right at the end of the curly brace and hit the enter return key a couple of times. Now I'm going to use class to apply this. Now I may use this blue text somewhere else. I don't know if I will or not at this point, but I'm going to be thinking forward, thinking ahead, planning ahead. So I'm not going to give it an ID. I'm going to go ahead and give it a class. And the class starts with a period. So I'm going to type in the period, and I'm just going to call this blue, capital T, blue text. Okay? And then I'm going to open up a curly brace and hit the enter return key. And remember, I had copied that color of text that the instructions tell us to do. So text color is always just color. So I'm going to type in color, colon, and then Control V or Command V for that color code, which is number 7591E5, and then semicolon, and then hit the enter return key. Okay, now just simply making the class doesn't give me the color that I need it to be. I have to apply that class to a tag. So I need to go back to my source code here, and where I created that span tag, place my cursor right after the N inside of that tag and hit the spacebar. And now my code hint box comes up, and now I can type in class, and when I select class, you'll notice my blue text class that I just created comes up. So I just hit the enter return key one more time. So it should say span space class equals blue text in quotation marks. Now if I save this and toggle over to my design view, I have that blue purplish text that I want that splits introducing in the title there. Okay, so now that I've got my heading 1 all set up and my heading 2 all set up, let's toggle back over to Blackboard and see what my next set of instructions are to finish out the next section here. So toggle back over to Firefox there, and so we left off right there with apply heading 1 and 2 at number 5, and so we're on step number 6. It says the first paragraph that begins CSS adds flexibility should be formatted with CSS to italicize and increase line height to 2em. Insert, and then it says insert CSS HTML JPEG above this paragraph. Add appropriate alt text for the image, and it says hint, place the image in a new div, can help with centering. So let's scroll up here. Okay, so this is what it's supposed to look like. We have this HTML image that goes right underneath the heading 2, and then we have that text underneath that goes in, and we need to style a little bit of that. So let's toggle back over to Dreamweaver and jump back into code here where we were at, and there's that paragraph. I'm going to go ahead and tab this in just a little bit so it matches up with the rest of mine, and it looks like I need to do that with some of my other tags too, so I'm going to quickly do that. And that one there got pushed back a little bit. Not sure what happened. There must be an extra space there. Okay. That one as well. Let's bring that back. Okay, sorry. Just me and my what I like to do in terms of my coding. Okay, so we need to put that image right above the paragraph here, and let's go ahead and do that first before we start styling this paragraph. So I'm going to place my cursor before the P tag there and hit the enter return key a couple of times, and I want to leave myself with about 3 spaces. So 1, 2, 3. Okay. So in the instructions say hint, place the image in a div tag to help with centering. So this is the nuance of images in HTML. You can't position images wherever you want them to go. You can position images in relation to text, like if you want the text to wrap around an image, so you can actually position an image left, right, so text can wrap around images. But if you just insert an image, you can't just place it wherever you need to go. And so the fix, or the workaround for that, is to use the div tag to wrap the image inside of it, so that way you can position the div tag, and the place of that div tag helps move that image around. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a little HTML here to help with that. So I'm going to open up a left curly brace and type in div, and I'm going to try it this way. If it doesn't work this way, then we'll go another route. But I'm just going to go ahead and go with a generic div. I'm not going to add an ID or a class to it, but instead I'm going to align this div. So I'm going to go div space, and then you'll see the align right there, right off the top, and then I'm just going to hit center and select center there, and then close that off with a right caret. And then this is the reason why I added the 3 extra spaces here, so that I could go down on line 19 there, and then left caret / to close that div out, so then I leave a space to insert that image. So because I'm nesting this image inside of the div, I'm going to tab in on line 18 inside of that div, and then type in a left caret and do my image. So I'm going to type in img, and then hit the enter return key, space, and then src for source, and then hit the enter return key again, so I get my browse code hint there, and hit enter return one more time. And then I have to go back to my root folder, so I'm going to select intro CSS lessons 4 and find my images folder, and let's see, click on that. That's the image that I need. It's the, if you look at this, okay, so that's a different image, so CSS HTML JPEG, and then click open, and then hit the space bar, and I'm going to type in alt, and in the Alt key I'm going to just type in CSS HTML image for the Alt, and oops, I spelled that wrong. HTML, there we go. And then space, and then / right caret to close that out. And I'm going to hit save, and then I just want to see how this is going to look. So I'm going to click on design, and you'll notice that my image here is a lot larger than my my web page. Now, this could be because this image here is fixed. It's a fixed width, and if you remember right, when we created our div container, click over to code view real quick, in our div container we made our width 80%. So when we preview this, the image is going to essentially exceed the container that we have for it in the rendering in Dreamweaver. So what we need to check to see is how does that affect it when we preview it in a browser. So I'm going to click on preview in Firefox here and see what we've got. So what you'll notice here is the image does look centered, but now it fits with inside. Now this is the problem and the difficulty that web designers face is you want to have a responsive design that allows you to resize windows and your content to flow and change with that. And that's why we use a percentage for the width of the div tag. But the problem is we insert images that are not responsive or respond in the same way. This is a fixed image width, and so we have this problem of the image exceeding the container that we have for it. So one of the fixes that we can do, and the easy fix for now, is to, instead of making our div container a percentage width 80%, we can give it a fixed width. And the way we should base that off of is the image size, and I don't know what the image size is for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and toggle over to my Finder here. Sorry, my Finder isn't open. Let's go ahead and minimize some of these things and open up this folder, and this is where Photoshop comes in handy. So I'm going to open up my image, that CSS HTML JPEG, and I'm going to right click, open with Photoshop, and Photoshop is going to give me the dimensions of this image. So I'm going to go up to image size, and change that to pixels. So it's 800 pixels wide. So that's I need to at least make my container width at least 800 pixels. So I'm going to hit cancel there and go ahead and close Photoshop out. And then I'm going to open up Dreamweaver one more time and click over into my code view. So there is a way to make responsive designs, fluid designs with percentages, but it's a lot more coding. It's a lot more advanced in terms of making it work with images, fixed images, etc. So the process that I will teach you in this class will more or less teach you the basics and the simplest way of designing these sites, so that way you're not overwhelmed, or just kind of so you get some of the basic concepts and can move on, say later on, if you want to do some more advanced designing. So normally I don't make my page containers a percentage because of that reason for this class. So what we can do is we can just go ahead and change this to 800 pixels, our container width here, and that would help. Or I could add a little bit more pixel dimension here, and typically speaking, for fixed width containers, for fixed width containers for websites, generally speaking, the largest you can go is about 940 pixels. I mean, you could actually go much larger, but the problem is width is directly related to screen resolution. So currently, most laptops and newer computers with newer monitors have higher resolutions than 940. A lot of them are like 1080p or 1080i, or even higher, and you can fit a website or a width of that into one of those screens easily. But there are still a number of people that are using the old school monitors that have a much lower resolution. And so 940 is about as much as you can get away with without creating what's called the horizontal scroll bar, which is a huge designer faux pas. You never want to have a horizontal scroll bar. You want to have a vertical scroll bar, but horizontal, not good design. So you have to account for that. So anywhere between 900 and 940 pixels for a container width is about where you need to be. So 900 might make it actually a nice round number for this design with that image, since it's 800 pixels wide, and by centering that image it'll give us about 50 pixels on each side to be centered in. So let's go ahead and go with 900 pixels wide, fix that in the terms of the page container, and File, Save All. And let me come back to, let's see here if I have, did I close that out? I believe I did. So let's go back to Dreamweaver and preview that one more time. And so now it should still be about the same, right? But here's what's going to happen. Oops, clicked off that on accident. Now let's see what happens. So as I minimize my window, what happens is, you notice a difference here. The window shrinks, but the site, the container doesn't shrink with it. And you also notice that the text doesn't move and doesn't shrink to fit also. So this is both the plus and the drawback of a fixed width design, and it's not fluid, so it doesn't change to the dimension of the website. So that's why you have to be careful with this type of design. But it's also the most predictable and easiest to use, or easiest to start with in terms of beginning level web designing. So that's why we're going to do it this way instead of the 80%. Okay. All right. So let's go back. I'm going to close that out. Go back to Dreamweaver here and go back to my source code again. So remember, this is where we're at. Just put that div align center in there so I could center the image. But next I need to add some styling to this paragraph. Now here's the thing. I'm going to go back to our instructions here real quick. So it wants us to italicize this text here. And I'm not sure what we're going to do with this embedded text there. If I scroll down and read a little bit, it says embedded CSS and external CSS are heading 3. So that's good because right now these are set up as paragraphs. So if I were to target the paragraph tag and to change the line height and the italics to this font, all the text below it is also going to inherit the same properties. So this is the problem that you will face in terms of if you want to make things look a little bit different, you got to start or better learn how to use IDs and classes. And with text, it's better to use classes because you'll end up using those over and over again. So we're not going to target just the P here, the paragraph tag for this paragraph. We're going to actually create another class and apply it to this paragraph. So just to review, we need to make it italicize and increase the line height to 2em. So I'm going to scroll over here to Dreamweaver and click into my CSS here. And right after .blue text, the last class that we made, place my cursor after the curly brace and hit enter return. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this the caption. So I'm going to type in period and then caption. I could also do caption text is probably the way I should do that because there is a div tag, or there is a tag now that is called caption. So we don't want to duplicate an already existing tag name with a class name. So I'm going to call it caption text and open up a curly brace. And for the italicized, I believe it is font. Is it font or I think it's font style. Yes, that's what it is. So I'm going to scroll down and select font style, and there it is, italic. Okay, and then hit my semicolon, and then line height. So line height, and it says 2M. So you're probably wondering what 2M means. Hit the enter return key before I tell you, and then right curly brace. M's is a multiplier value. So by default, whatever your default font size is, like if you set that up in the body, then it'll multiply that value by 2, essentially, is what that is. And so it also inherits. So wherever, whatever tag you're in or div tag you're in, if you've already set a font size, it'll multiply that value again. So it's actually a cool way of increasing font size, because it'll also change font size based off of browser size or your window size, which is pretty nice. So go ahead and hit Command S there. We need to apply that class to the paragraph. So where it says P, place your cursor right inside the P there and spacebar, and your code hint should come up. So then type in class and hit the enter return key, and again that class comes up in our code hint, and just select it. It's easier that way, you don't misspell it for some reason, and hit the enter return key once again, and then file, save all, double check your work always to make sure it looks good. There it is. Okay, nicely done. I'm going to tab back over, and if you remember, we need to do a couple more things here. So it says create a div for the embedded CSS and external CSS headings and text shown in blue above. So we need to create a div specifically for this section. And then we need to give it some properties. So background color is that blue color that we used before, text color is white, and then we need to change some other things to this as well. We need to add some padding to it too. So let's tab over real quick and jump back into our CSS and click off that split view and get into code. And you notice that I'm just going right down the list, right? So I've started off with a body, we have a generic div, and then I'm getting more specific as I go along in my page design. So I'm going to hit the enter return key, and now I could do an ID for this div tag, or I could do it as a class. It all depends if I want to use this, say the same class in another place on the same page, but I don't. And let's go ahead and practice using both IDs and classes when it comes to div tags. So we're going to go ahead and do an ID, and let's call this let's see, that's all about CSS, right, or external. So this is all types. So we'll do types CSS container. So anytime when you're creating an ID or even a class for a div, and it's a section, like it's a definitive block in your design, it's just a good idea to call it a container. You'll remember what it's for later on, and you'll thank me for it, because if you leave that off, types CSS, it's not as descriptive as types CSS container. I know that this container is specifically for that box section, and it's going to help me find it later on. So that's why I've also called this page container up above. Alright, so after types CSS container, I'm going to open up a curly brace. And for this one, we also need to give it this a width, by the way. The page container that we made before was 900 pixels wide. So I want this to look centered. So if I want to go back and look at this, you'll notice that this is centered somewhat within the design. Okay, so in order to center it, first of all, I need to add a width to this div tag, because I've given the page itself a width, right? 900 pixels. So if I want this to look centered, I have to give it a width that's slightly smaller than 900 pixels. And then I have to center it. Now centering it, there's a trick. So I'm going to tab back over, and I'm going to delete a couple times back so that my cursor is right after the curly brace, and hit the enter return key again so my code hint comes up. So I'm going to start off same procedure as I did with my page container, width. I always start off kind of in the same way. Now 900 pixels, So what if I want to make it, give it a little bit of, spacing left and right inside of 900 pixels? Let's say 20 pixels. So that means I need to make my width 840 pixels so it fits within there. Now you might think, oh, I'll just align it and center it. But that's actually not how it works with div tags and a lot of other things as well. The way you actually align a div tag or position it in pretty much in any way is to use margin. So I'm going to type in margin, and the trick here is this. Okay, we're going to do this. We're going to do this long form, and then I'm going to show you the short form. And this works for padding. This also works for margin. Works for a lot of different other values where you have sides to it. So the first number is always the top. So we're going to do a little bit of top margin at the top, so it pushes itself down a little bit. So we're going to do 10 pixels on the top. And then the next value is right, so it goes in clockwise order. So the first value is top, second value is right, and to make this center we have to say we want it to basically auto move itself. And then the bottom, we're going to go ahead and do 0, okay? Because we just want to position from the top. The bottom will worry about whatever comes beneath it, and we'll apply margin on that element instead of this element. And then the same thing, so the third number is the bottom, and the last number is the right. Okay, so it always works this way in terms of using the box. This is what's called the box model. Okay, so these values always are in the same order. Now this is a long form. I could also do this in the short form, but in order to do this in the short form, my top and bottom values must match. If I'm okay with that, that's fine. So for instance, if I want my bottom margin to also be 10 pixels, then I just leave the first value as 10 pixels, and then the second value is the left and right, or the second value is the left and right dimensions. So the top and bottom would be 10 pixels, and left and right would be auto. Okay, so but I want to go ahead and just leave the bottom as 0. So I'm going to go 10 pixels as top, right value is auto, bottom is 0, and left as auto. Okay. Next, I want to do my background color. Oh wait, I forgot. We definitely want to add some padding. And if you remember right, we added about 10 pixels padding before on the page container. So let's go ahead and do padding. And then this is another version of short form. So here, I'm going to do 10 pixels padding. When you only do one value with padding or margin, just like this, it's going to apply that value to all 4 sides. So right now this is top, right, left, bottom, or top, right, bottom, left for all 4 sides. Okay, and then next I want to go down and do background. And if I remember right, that color is right there. So I'm just going to grab that color by selecting it and then copying it. So Command C, paste it, semicolon, and then hit the enter return key and write curly brace. And then go ahead and toggle over to your source code right here. And now I need to add that div tag inside of my page. So what I'm going to do is place my cursor in that space on line 21 and hit the enter return key. So I have a space above, right? Just want to be able to see and break my page up a little bit in my code. And type in div space ID, enter, return, and you'll notice there it is, types CSS container. Hit the enter return key, write caret, and before you forget, close out that div by placing your cursor down here on line 27 after external CSS, and then left caret /. Okay, so hopefully that red mark goes away. So you'll notice that you get these red marks if you've forgotten to close a tag, and if you hover over it, it'll kind of give you a little error message that says, hey, you forgot to close the tag. Now remember what I did before is I tabbed in anything that I've inserted into a div container. I've tabbed those the content inside so that it looks like it's also inside that container. So I'm going to highlight the embedded and external paragraphs here all the way down, and then hit the tab button. And so it looks as if it's nested inside there. Okay. Let's go ahead and see what it all looks like first before we change some of this other stuff inside of this area. So I'm going to hit Save All, and then come over to my browser and preview. There we go. Not too bad, right? Got some spacing here. I could probably do, instead of 960, because that's 20 pixels spacing here on each side, I could do 980, which would only give me 10 pixels on each side. But I think I'm going to go ahead and leave it just the way it is. Key point here. You remember that we have these rounded corners, right? Rounded corner there, rounded corner there. So I'm just reviewing, quick reminder. Tab back over to Dreamweaver here, and then click on Intro CSS Main. So this is what I meant when, because anytime we've used a div tag here, it's going to apply this border 15 pixel radius to any of the div tags that I've used. If you look at my source code here, I've used 2 divs. One for the page container, and then one for that smaller container for types of CSS. So anytime I've used a div tag, okay, because this is just a tag, it's not an ID, it's not a class, this is a tag. So anytime I've used div anywhere in my source code, in my HTML, it's going to apply 15 pixels radius. Now, it's a time saver, right? Because in this way, since I know I'm going to use rounded corners on all of those divs, I don't have to redo this every time I create a new ID for my div container, right? I didn't have to apply that radius in this ID, and I didn't have to apply that same radius in this ID down here. So it's a time saver, right? Time saver and design saver as well, because every time I've used that div, it applies that border radius. Now, here's the problem though. What if I didn't want to use a border radius on that div container down here? Then I would have to essentially delete this section out and apply that border radius to just this ID to apply that border radius to only the page container. Okay? Okay, so that was just a quick review. We're going to tab back over to Firefox here and close my preview window out, and then I want to scroll down here and find out what else I need to do. So it says text color is white, embedded CSS and external CSS are heading 3, create a class selector to change both paragraphs in the div to italic, and then add padding to the div as needed. Okay, so I'm going to actually kind of stray away from the directions on this for a couple reasons, and I want to show you, and I'm going to do it for very one specific reason, and I'm going to talk about what inheritance means, like the inheritance you might receive from, say, a beloved uncle or aunt or something like that. The way HTML works and CSS works is when you nest things, when you have a parent element and a child element inside. So when you have a child element inside of a parent element, it'll inherit some of the same properties. So that doesn't make sense right now, but I'm going to show you what that means here in just a sec. So recall that we made this div ID types CSS container. Okay. Now the instructions say that I should create a class selector to apply italic and white text to those paragraphs. But here's the deal, I don't have to do that. I can actually do the same thing and apply it to just this ID. And when I do that, all of the elements inside of that container will inherit those properties. Will be italic and white. Now, but there's a problem, right? Remember, we have to change these headings to an H3, and if you look at the design, we don't want those to be italic. We want them to be white, but we don't want them to be italic. So, this is what this means here. Back to my CSS, okay? I'm going to, in my type CSS container, I'm going to go ahead and place my cursor right after padding, and I always end up putting my text styles kind of in the middle and leaving my background there at the bottom, just the way I do things. And we want our text color to be white, so I'm going to hit the enter return key here so I have my line on line 33 and then type in color enter return key, and then pound symbol FFF, and then semicolon. So that's the text color white, right? If you toggle over to design, all of your text inside gets that white property. So I don't actually have to create a special class selector just for this paragraph. Okay. Now let's kind of go through and fix the rest of what we need to do. Let's make these heading 3s right now. So click over to code and then source code. And then where you see the embedded CSS, if you have your properties inspector open, just change that to a heading 3. It just makes it a little bit easier instead of typing it out. And doing the same thing for external CSS, change that to a heading 3 as well. Okay. So now if I look at my design, I have a little bit different there. Okay. And these are still paragraphs. So this is all about inheritance. I'm going to show you one thing here, and this is the reason we're going to do this. I'm going to show you, so don't do this, but I'm going to show you how inheritance works, and then I'm going to show you how to avoid inheritance in this particular case. So I have my cursor right after color, and continuing with my organization, this is all about font here, and I'm going to change my font style to italic. Okay, and then I'm going to make sure I type in my semicolon there. Click over to design, and look what happened. All of the elements inside of this div ID, right, the parent element is the div ID type CSS container. Okay, the child elements are the H3, the embedded and the external, and then the paragraphs. Those are what are called child elements in this particular case. Okay, and that's why they're inheriting the italic. Okay, now to get around that, I could add a class to these to just the paragraphs, but that's actually a little bit of extra code that I don't need to do, and I can be more efficient if I understand how to be very specific. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add our first what's called a compound selector. So far the selectors that we've used are tags, IDs, and classes. So now we're going to do a combination of both. Okay, and compound selectors allow you to be specific, which helps with inheritance issues like our font style italic. So I'm going to delete font style italic out. Okay, so it's out of my styling there, and place my now do this. Okay, now follow what I'm going to do. So I'm going to place my cursor after that curly brace on line 35 and hit enter return key, and I'm going to start typing in pound. And you'll notice that when I type in pound, this is a cool thing about CodeHint and Dreamweaver, it brings up my IDs that I've already used. And this is so useful because a lot of times you're going to end up retyping these over and over again in your CSS style sheet to be specific. So what's nice is I can just select that. If I don't, and I say I start typing it and I mistype my my thing, or I misspelled it somehow. Okay, so I'm spelling this, on accident here, like so say I spell it COTNA, something like that. Okay, it's not going to know that this is the same thing, right? I need this to be the exact same. So there's a couple ways around that. One, you could just, do what I was doing there, start typing in your pound symbol and just select that ID that we've already created, or you can just copy and paste the one from above. So I'm going to select out of my code hint there, I'm going to select that types CSS container and then hit the spacebar. Next, I'm going to type in the P. And the P is a tag. Remember, just like div is, and just like body is, just like h1 is, right? So what this is saying is the P tag that is inside of the types CSS container. That's the selector that I'm looking for. That's the selector that I'm targeting. Okay, so it's the P inside of the types CSS container. So then open up a curly brace and hit the enter return key and type in font style. So select font style and select italic. And then semicolon, enter return key, right curly brace. Save all. Okay, and then click over and toggle over, and so see what you're going to have is only the paragraphs within this div tag received that italic property. Okay, if I were to do it as the other way, with the way the instructions asked me to do it, what I would have to do is create a class called something. I would have had to create the class, probably something like, italic text or something like that. And then I would have had to apply that class to each one of these paragraphs within inside of this container. So that would have been 2 extra lines of code. Now, this way, I've only done it with basically 1 line of code in CSS. Okay, so I'm going to toggle back over and double check to make sure that I don't need to do anything else with that section. Okay, so it says I've got the background color, I've got the italics. It does look as if the font inside of this this div is a little bit smaller, and that's something that we could just simply add to that style. So if I click back over to DW here, I could just target only the P's. So if I go place my cursor right after the curly brace, and then hit enter return key, and type in font size, and then what I would like to do here is just do a percentage. So I'm just going to reduce the size of this font by 15%. So that's why I'm going to say 85%. So I'm going to hit Command S, and if I look at this, it's just going to be a little bit smaller. I don't know if it's totally necessary, but I'm just going to try to follow the example here as best as I can. Okay, alright, so I'm going to toggle back over to our instructions here, and I'm going to go ahead and knock out number 8 right now. So it says change the title from untitled document to introducing CSS. If you remember the way I grade, if you don't do this, you're going to get a 1 automatically. So flip over to code, get into source code, go all the way to the top of your document and look for that title tag where it says untitled document. And then I forgot what we were supposed to say. It's introducing CSS. There we go. Introducing CSS. Make sure you save that. Okay. Last but not least, I think we have one more thing to do. This says format the footer text as a heading 5 and use CSS to format. Excuse me. Replace copyright with the copyright symbol and use the current year and your own name. Change the text color to a light gray. Wow, that should be pretty easy, don't you think? So let's tab over. And so if we change the copyright section here to our own name, so highlight that like we've done all the other ones, and then in the format, in the page properties inspector, select heading 5. Now, since we haven't used a heading 5 anywhere on this page, we can just target the heading 5 directly. We don't have to, say it's in a specific div tag or anything of that nature. But before I go ahead and style that, I'm going to go ahead and delete this out and put the date in there. So yeah, we've been using this for 3 years. And type in my name. So copyright, and then I need to change the copyright lettering there to just the symbol. So I'm going to delete that, and to get symbols, the quickest way to do symbols is to start with the ampersand symbol. So you hit Shift 7 for the ampersand symbol, and you're going to get your code hint to come up, and you're going to get all these great symbols that you can use. So I'm going to just type in COP, and copy should come up in your code hint, and then just hit enter return key. So this is the HTML equivalent to the copyright symbol. The ampersand, copy, and then the semicolon at the end there. Okay? And let's toggle back over to our CSS. And last but not least, sorry for the bell. Last but not least, hit the enter return key down at the bottom there. And then all we're doing is we're going after the H5. There's only one H5 in the whole page, so it's okay. We don't have to get fancy with a class or a ID or compound selector, which is like the one above. So we're just going to do H5, open up a curly brace, enter return key, type in color, and then select a light gray. In this case, I used the CCC gray before. Let me double check what my design looks like real quick. So it's in the white, so I guess I could use that same gray. So type in pound symbol CCC for that light gray, semicolon, enter return key, right curly brace, and then save all. Before we finish this up, double check. Go ahead and preview in a browser. Well, I just did it in Safari. That's okay. There's my copyright symbol down there at the bottom. Looks all blue and perfect. There we go. So close that out. And next, last but not least, to turn this assignment in, just going to go ahead and close that and quit Dreamweaver here. And down here, remember to submit the assignment, click on the link here at the top. I know you guys have done this before. Just a quick reminder though. And down here is where I need to browse to attach the file. So in order for this to work correctly, okay, what we need to do is we need to zip this file, the folder that we created earlier. So if you right click on the Mac and say compress intro CSS lesson 4, okay, then on the desktop there, put it over here. Now in my Blackboard, I can browse my computer and select that zip file to submit. So that would be right there, intro CSS lesson 4. All right, so I hope this was helpful for you guys, and I will see you next week.